Okay, everyone, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. Let's make a start. I hope you're all well and healthy and hanging in there. My name is Sergio Lara Bercial, and I'm one of the nutcases that supports this wonderful adventure that we call iCoach Kids, a not-for-profit global movement to support youth coaches worldwide. Thank you for making the time to join us today, and welcome to iCoach Kids Shares live webinar number 7, Behavior Change Theory for Coaches with Professor Jim McKenna. Now, before we get going, please let me take you through some basic family rules to make sure that everyone has the best possible experience during the webinar. First of all, please respect everybody. We really want you to have an opinion and ask questions, but let's do that in a way that is respectful of everybody. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to be respectful of everybody. Please keep your camera and microphone off at all times so we can focus on the speaker. Please, by all means, submit your questions as we go through on the chat, both either on YouTube or on Zoom, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. And by all means, again, feel free to post on social media, either on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Let me also explain how the session is going to run. So after a few introductions, I will introduce the topic, and then Jim will take 15 or 20 minutes to take us through his presentation. Then I will have a chat with Jim and then open for your questions from the chat. Today's topic, behavior change theory for coaches, is perhaps one of the most important yet more frequently overlooked topics in coach education. As coaches, you could argue that we are in the business of changing people's behaviors. In our case, young participants and athletes, and that to do so, we must also exhibit the most possibly effective and efficient behaviors on our part. So what does it take to change behavior? And what elements support or hinder that process? To talk about this, we have with us today one of the leading minds in the UK and beyond. Jim McKenna is Professor of Physical Activity and Health at Leeds Beckett University and is recognized as an expert in behavior change. Jim has over 30 years of experience in higher education, during which he's worked in roles focused on sport delivery, coach education, academic teaching, and research leadership. He's published over 100 peer-reviewed papers, one of them with me, and in a variety of areas. And Jim is recognized for his ability to make scientific issues accessible to all. And again, you will see that today. He's won many awards for teaching and research, and he also coached at elite level in sport, working at both Gloucester and Bristol Rugby Union clubs. But much more than that, Jim is a fantastic friend and mentor. As my PhD supervisor, Jim not only made me a better researcher, but most importantly, made me a much better person, and was always more concerned about Sergio the person than Sergio the researcher. As he always says, Maslow before Bloom. Please welcome Professor Jim McKenna. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Oh, thank you very much, Sergio. I think after that, the only person who'd expect me to come forward would be my mum.
No, listen, thank you so much for making the time today.
Okay.
I'm really excited. I know you and I have had conversations around this topic multiple times.
Yeah.
But it's great that you're going to share this today with the rest of the iCoach Kids family. So I'm going to
Okay.
stop sharing my camera, my screen, so you can then share your presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. That's coming through now.
Let's get that up. How are we doing?
Perfect. It's
okay. All right. So this is a session about behavior change. So my background is as a PE teacher and as a coach. Through this session, I'll try to give you lots of practical examples of things that are going on. I'm going to emphasize nudge theory, which is behavioral economics. And that explains why the strap line underneath the heading here is make it easy. Because when the originator, or one of the two originators of the theory of behavioral economics, was asked how to define nudge theory, he said, well, just make things easy. And that's an illustration of the challenge that we're trying to do. And I'll try and put as many examples of nudge theory as I can to you, because I don't suppose everybody wants to do really difficult behavior change. Everyone wants to do it the easy way. And I'll try and give you some good examples that will help you. Okay, so throughout this session, what I'm trying to do here is to illustrate to you that the world of behavior change has moved from, in the yellow column, single point solutions, which I'll call confetti, which is to say, when you throw confetti at a wedding, none of the little beads of paper stick to anything. So they're individual solutions in their own way. And while that's fine for isolated occasions, many of the challenges that we're dealing with in terms of organizing groups, etc., are much more about systems. And so I liken them to spaghetti rather than confetti. So I'll keep using that kind of idea, where spaghetti kind of orientation to behavior change is really all about looking at the complexity of behavior change and not really expecting it to be simple, because many of the behaviors we're interested in aren't simple. They've got a lot of components to them. Okay, so the challenge in behavior change is that it's just not easy. Okay, so some of the reasons why it's not easy. Well, you know, the first one is, in information-rich environments, attention is in short supply. It's the hardest thing to command. And we're drawn automatically, because of our biological processing, we're drawn to pay attention to things that are new and things that are threatening. So that means we don't pay attention to things that are necessarily good for us. So attention is an essential problem to start with. Let me just move my screen because it's covering some of the things here. Another problem is that we've got extremely poor recall as humans. You might think that your brain is for recall. It's actually terrible at recalling things, which is why you try to make sure that whenever you design an intervention, if it's relying on recall, it's a really poor design. Don't do that. Try and overcome the shortcomings of human recall so that the environment reminds you to do things. A third thing that makes it behavior change difficult is that we're all subject to different social drives. And if you think that our brain is designed to keep us alive, and that's its principal function, in the absence of wild animals attacking us and that kind of thing, we don't have that kind of threat. But what we do have is the social judgment of others. And we are massively vigilant to that. And so we are massively vigilant to, what do I think you think of me? I'm imagining this, but it's extremely powerful. And it drives many of the behaviors that you find challenging in coaching. Then there's a final thing, which is, what are the things that I don't even notice? My blind spots. And that's why it's really helpful that you kind of work with people who are not in your domain, et cetera, so that you can reveal things to yourself. So you get over your own blind spots. So these are some of the challenges. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what nudge is and where does it sit itself. Well, nudge is sometimes referred to as choice architecture, which is to say, you can see the continuum along the bottom. Laissez-faire is do as you like. Well, nudge is about trying to get people to do as they would like, but are unlikely to, because they can't command their attention, they can't keep their recall on it, the people around them are driving them to the wrong thing, or you're talking about something that's in a blind spot for them. We're trying to nudge them so it's easy. Okay, you can see you can go a lot further to the right and get a lot more controlling and commanding, but nudge is light touch. Okay, so the image that you see now is a skateboarder going downhill, and what I want you to see here is that nudging is a downhill business. It is not an uphill business. Okay, so it's what people want to do already, but find difficult because of attention, recall, social drives, or blind spots. That comes the challenge. So let me give you an example of a nudge that Sergio and I talked about yesterday when he was saying that when he's with the boys in his basketball club, he says one of the things that predicts whether they're going to do their half-hour pre-practice personal development sort of work, he says once they put their shoes on, if they take out their personal development sheet, that can remind them that they'll do it. But if they don't take out the sheet, they'll do all the things about social drives and what their friends are doing, and they'll be messing around, and it'll be half an hour wasted when they could do something else. So we came up readily, and so if you use this, you're stealing it from Sergio, okay? Shoes on, sheets out. Okay, so that means when you put your shoes on, putting your training shoes on is an activating moment for them to then reach for the personal development sheet about what you're working on this week. And that's a typical kind of a nudge. Now, that one works really well because it's quite memorable. And if you do use it, please credit Sergio for it, okay? What it is not is this. Nudging is not pushing the rock uphill forever. It is not a Sisyphean task, okay? We're not interested in that, okay? So there we are. So let's get you off with something nice and easy. If you can grab a pencil and a bit of paper or something, it won't need to be very much, because this is a very simple exercise. Okay. So we're in Leeds, or I'm in Leeds at the moment, which is a city of learning, and its symbol is the owl. Okay. So we all know that's about wisdom. All right. So I'll try and help you to draw an owl. All right. So here we go. With your pencil and a bit of paper, maybe you could draw on two circles, a large one, kind of oblongs, really, aren't they? One is more circle, one is more oblong. So you can see one is going to be the head and one is going to be the body. Okay. So now we've got to keep this nice and simple, haven't you? So why don't I just tell you? Why don't you just fill in the rest? And of course, of course, that's stupid, isn't it? But that's what often happens in behaviour change. People say, "Oh, we'll do behaviour change." Well, it's not just fill in the rest. There are some key kind of ideas that we need to work with, and I try and make some of those available, and so they become second nature to you. Okay, as we go through today. So here is a kind of a display of some of the things that nudge type theories have been used to develop and to really make a profound difference to. Now, you are almost certainly being subject by nudges or subject to nudges every day. And I'll try and give you some examples, but I'm going to focus essentially on sport examples. And I was thinking here, if you've got, I call them problem athlete behaviors. I don't mean that they're particular problems, but they're things you'd like to see something do better. And the athletes, maybe the kids you coach want to do better in these things as well. So I could pick up some of these with kind of rest and recovery. How are the kids doing in terms of getting enough sleep? Are they eating the right foods? How many of them are actually turning up to training on time? So training attendance is often a challenge, right? And suddenly you start going, oh yeah, there's a few things here that I might want to do. You can use nudging to help any of these. It's just a matter of thinking through on what is the scale of the challenge. Are we looking at it as a confetti problem, or are we looking at it as a spaghetti problem? The more you look at it as a spaghetti problem, the more demanding it is for you, but the more likely it is your program's going to be successful. So here are some examples from a study published last week. It's showing you 145 companies and non-profit organizations about which types of nudges they use. Okay, and what you can see is all of them are using 50% of the respondents. They could answer as many as they want, tick as many as they wanted. 50% were using these kinds of nudges. Now, what I'm surprised at from this slide is that the elements in green are massively underused, but are hugely influential, which is to change the organization, the thing that surrounds you, its structures and processes. Only half the groups are using that. That's a really important missed opportunity for organizations. Incentives, rewards doesn't mean money, though it could mean money. It can mean attention, it can mean recognition, and all kinds of things like this, where you can see there's only 57%. There's a lot of room for operation here, so you can choose what suits you and fits with how you prefer to operate. So part of our challenge in terms of working in behavior change is that we want to imagine we know why people are doing things, and we want to know who the groups are. And mostly we're not right. So what we need to do is to get behind the real why and the hidden who. Now, the real why is, what's the real reason? I could say to myself, Jim, I'm having a private conversation with myself. What's the reason why you're not a better coach, Jim? And I've really got to look into myself and go, well, you know what it is? I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you get the spirit of where I am. There's a real why that I don't want the rest of the world to know. Okay. And then there's a hidden who. And why you need to know this is how many people are like me around the real why, because that can tell you how systematic and what scale you need to operate to make a difference in your group. Okay. So the real why and the hidden who is where the action is. All right. So let me give you some examples then. Hand washing. How are we going to deal with the problem of hand washing? The chart that you see here shows the proportion of people in an American hospital system who are upholding the hand hygiene rules. And you can see that as they shift along the horizontal, as they get more tired and they're in there more, there are fewer and fewer people upholding the standards. So what would you do to solve that? You see the problem, it's hand washing. All right. You choose from what I'm going to offer you now. You can have one, which is a confetti approach, or you can have a spaghetti approach, which is combinations. Okay, so some examples. So this is what a school teacher has done. Ask the children in the class to wipe their hands on a piece of bread, mark the conditions inside a plastic bag, and then seal the bag sealed the bread inside a bag and put it under the blackboard in the classroom and left it for 2 weeks. This is a scare tactic, and what you should see is touching your Chromebooks is worse than anything else. There you go. That's a message for us all. Clean your keyboard regularly and often. Okay, so would you do that? That's a scare tactic, and that runs out of juice really quickly because you no longer stay scared. Okay, not a useful strategy for long-term change. Good for short-term. What about this? What if we put some signs up in and around where people might need to do it? So maybe you put these signs up in the loo. We've got two types of signs here. We got one by the sink to remind you, but if you're going by the sink, that's great. But if you're not getting the attention of being near the sink, so if you've come to the loo and you go straight out without seeing the sink, that doesn't work. The second sign, the one at the top, is giving you an explanation of why you should bother. Now, you might not be interested in the spread of germs, so it might fail on that front. But you can decide whether you think you could do this and scare. You could do this on the way out from the loo, which is you could have a sign which says you wash your hands, or if you didn't, you use this handle. Of course, you already see the problem, don't you? If there's people other than you in the loo and they're watching you, this is the social pressure, then you, if you didn't wash your hands, are going to use the ones which says you did, because you know the social judgment of others is very important. That undermines the effectiveness of that. And here's one. You come out of the loo and you didn't wash your hands, and there's an alarm bell rings, and everybody knows now that you're the guy who didn't wash his hands. Okay, what does that do? That activates stereotype threats, which means that people are never going back to that loo. All they do is avoid that situation because they've lost social standing because of that. It might look like it's a good idea to shame people, but it rarely works well. And then there's my final offer. My final offer is that the handle in the loo that you've got, it emits a light which disinfects your hands as you put your hand on it. Okay, I believe this exists, so I think it's real. The problem is you only use one hand, and it doesn't do between your fingers, and it doesn't do the back of your hands. What are you going to choose? Because after all, it was only a simple behavior, washing your hands. Have you got a confetti approach, or are you thinking a spaghetti approach is better? For me, it's a spaghetti approach because it's so important in these COVID times. So if we go with the spaghetti approach, we would say that one of these cogs is really central to the operation of the system. But actually the spaghetti approach says, well, no one of them is more important than any other. They all do something. Some are bigger and others are smaller, but they're interacting in very important ways. So what we're starting to understand is that humans are psycho and logical. So you've probably seen that we're psychological, and you could say that. But actually we're psycho, which is to say we're irrational. But the good news in that is that we're predictably irrational, and behavioral and economics is really all about trying to investigate how are we predictably irrational. And then we are logical in lots of ways, but these two coexist in all of us. And this is where we get into the real why and the hidden who, because psycho factors are really playing out in terms of how we group together with others. Okay, so let me give you some sport examples of nudge. This is fantastic. I don't know how this hasn't captured a lot more imagination. This is from Spain. This is capturing the benefit of home advantage. It's easier to win at home. So the idea is stay at home. You know, we all know what lockdown is, but I thought this was fantastic. I haven't seen any evidence about what effect it's done, but for commanding attention, if you're a football fan, this is fantastic. And so you like Messi, you like Real Madrid, you like Atletico, whatever your interest is. But there's something very interesting here about it being, it's easier to win at home. So you're capturing that kind of spirit. So here are some other examples. I'm going to give you 6 examples now, kind of physical activity, sport sometimes, but you can see where they work. Number one is a bicycle manufacturer was sending bicycles, and 80% of them arrived broken. No, none of the delivery people were trying to break them. So they decided, what can we do? Well, let's make the packaging look like a TV. And that reduced the breakages by 80%. Nobody had to be told what to do. It just gave the impression of being a TV, and suddenly it was treated better. The problem of recall is illustrated in number 2. This is from 1969 and Apollo 11. The astronauts needed help to remind themselves what day it was. If you're taking drugs, number 3, a little reminder here, it's Monday. If the pill is still in there, you haven't taken your tablet today. That's a perfect example. Okay, so good nudges. They're things you want to do, but it's making it easy to do it. So number 4, you'll be familiar with spacing. what we're learning in local work here is that if your circles are too small in number 4, then people don't see them, so you don't have the issue about attention, so you're not dealing with that. If they're large and people can stand inside them, so they're like hula hoops on the ground, that is much better. Equally, if they've got an interesting message in them, that could be really interesting, so that people can pay attention to that. The point about the circles, though, is they tell you where to stand, so it's very directed. Number 5, use your sunscreen. It's pretty obvious what it's telling you if you don't use it. And number 6 is very social, and I think it's really interesting. This is the South African rugby union team. The numbering on their shirts showing pictures, showing a picture of people who are likely to be their own supporters. So when you pull this shirt on, you are representing all the people in South Africa. And that when you pull that shirt on, they're expecting you to do big things because you're representing them. That's a very powerful social initiative, and I think it's nudging in a very strong way of rugby players. Now, some other examples. Number 1 is trying to stop you throwing your cigarette butts on the floor. Well, I don't know how many it did stop, but it stopped this many. And all you were asking them to do is who you think is better, Ronaldo or Messi. The other 2 charts here that you've got 2 and 3 are physical activity things that you've seen, trying to encourage you to use the stairs a little bit more. And number 3 is telling you about how well you're doing so far this month in terms of physical activity. Number 4 is spacing, creating physical reminders. You don't know how to gauge 2 meters, do you? No, you don't. So when you get a reminder of what 2 meters looks like, and you know what grids look like for many of you, if you've done sport outside, sport coaching, you'll know what grids are. Here you've got social spacing grids. If you sit in the middle of a grid, you are going to be 2 meters away from everybody else. This is from Copenhagen. I think the US have copied it with circles. Works pretty well. And then the final 2 are from Sheffield in England, not far from where I am now. And they're spacing, distancing kind of concepts where you've got 2 meter Rita and 6 feet Pete. And those I love those, the Sheffield ones. They seem to me to be great fun. Our challenge is, what does 2 meters look like? What does 6 feet look like? Because what I see when people are doing physical activity, they don't seem to know what either of those things are. So if we know what systematic success in sport looks like, whether it's for coaches or for athletes, we need to think, right, how do we make sure that these behaviors happen? So let me show you some of the things that we know from a psychological perspective about things that work. So if we do self-scoring, we know that's a powerful factor for how well we pay attention to ourselves. So an example of self-scoring is if you go on holiday and you play crazy golf. And the first day, you say, oh, well, I don't care, it doesn't matter. But you go back the next day and you're going to play again. You know who won yesterday, don't you? Yeah, well, when you keep score, you play different. So keeping score is a very powerful tool. If you're scoring your own behavior, it's really that much more powerful because you're having to reflect on it and it's much more cognitively demanding. If you surround yourself with prompts, reminders to do it, because you won't remember, you've got poor recall, and rewards, which is making you feel good about doing the behavior, that makes the behavior more likely to happen. You're going to be more likely to do it. If you remind yourself of successful doing rather than unsuccessful doing, you're more likely to initiate a repetition of a behavior. If you want better behavior rather than just general behavior, reflecting on what made it successful and then intentionally transferring that to the next expedition into that behavior is going to make it more successful. And then finally on this one is set and refine goals so that you're upping the ante each time you're doing it. One of our challenges here is for setting and refining goals is we up the ante too soon for beginners. Now, that doesn't mean that they're beginners in terms of their life experience. What I'm talking about beginners here is someone who finds a behavior new. It doesn't mean that they haven't been in your sport for 40 years. They can still find a behavior that's new. If you find any of these in their own right difficult, then nudges can be used to make them happen. So let me give you an example of something I use for myself. This is my self-scoring scheme. I put it in my workbook, as Sergio can tell you, I carry it around with me everywhere. This is a slip of paper. It's pasted into my book and I fill it in at the end of every day. It's my end of day routine. It's in my book weeks in advance because I don't want to do this. I will forget, even though I've been doing it for probably 4 or 5 years now. Solidly, every Monday to Friday, I respond on a 1 to 10 scale. How well did I do my best to be happy, to find meaning, etc. It is not how well did it turn out. I'm interested in how well I did my best, because that retains the exertion on my part. It doesn't put anybody else in the frame. Nobody else is responsible. It's up to me to do my best. Now, what if I don't like my score? If I say I'm giving myself a 3, well, on the back of my scorecard, I have a set of solutions about what I need to do. Now, on the left is green, which is an easy solution, and on the right are more difficult solutions. So when I get a score of 3 or 4, where do you think I go looking for solutions? I go to the green. I go to the blue. I don't go looking for the red. What this is doing is when you've got a problem behavior, if the prompt about how to resolve it is nearby or immediately to hand, it gets used very readily. So what that does is then, if I've got a 3 or a 4, I know, and I can remind myself what I need to do. If I'm a newcomer to this, all I need to be reminded is just turn the page over, turn my little card over. Okay, so that's what's called a hot prompt. Here we've got self-scoring applied to the iCoach Kids Pledge. Now, you know, from my perspective, from a cognitive load demand, 10 items are too many. You won't want to fill in scores for 10 items at the end of a day, but you may want to pick up on some of these things where you just say, I'm going to do the even numbers ones this week and the uneven ones next week. So that'll give you 5 each time, and you're more likely to do that. That'll make it easier. I put Monday to Friday. You can choose how you like. But again, use the idea of how well did you do your best to make it inclusive, to prioritize the love of the sport above learning of sport, and so on. Just so that you make it so you're doing your best. So what I'm going to give you now are 6 models, 6 ways of thinking about things with progressive challenge. Each can build on the other. This is a Confetti example of a model that you can use to help your athletes, help the kids you coach, or help yourself to do better. Okay. The first one is, what's the one thing that will help the kids do better? Or what's the one thing that will make you a better coach? You could say that's a Confetti approach, right? The second thing, a two-part model now, is a fuel and friction. What we're learning for difficult behaviors and with challenges in some community groups, we're finding it very difficult when we add fuel stops working when the frictions are too great. So focus on removing fuel, removing friction is really powerful. The 3-part model, well, this looks too complicated to be a 3-part model, doesn't it? So let's shift off that. The 3 parts that I want you to concentrate here on, this is the COM-B model, is have they got the capacity or the capability to do the things you're interested in? Do they have the opportunity? So if you want them to practice things when they come on court, are the balls arranged in a particular place? Are the cones set out so they know exactly what you want them to do? And do they have a want to do it? This is COM-B, so capability, opportunity, and motivation. Do they have the want? You feel it getting more complicated now? Good. Number 4 is a real nudge-based approach. This is the EAST model, and it's easy. Is the behavior easy? Is it attractive to you? Is it social? Can I do it with my friends? Do I get social credit for it? And do I do it timely? Remember the hand washing across the time of day? That makes a difference. The time of the week when you ask people to do things, they all make a difference. The phrase that's repeated on this slide is make it. That means you must design it so it is those things. It's not how it turns out. You must make it attractive, easy, social, and timely. The 5th thing is for those of you who are organizing groups. So if you are coaching and you're working with, say, children's groups or youth groups and an adult group, and you perhaps got a male and a female section, these are some of the things that you need to consider because they all play out into why it doesn't work well, whatever it is. The challenge on this one, in this framework, it's sometimes referred to as an onion diagram, is it's got individuals at the middle, and it might not always be that individuals are what matters. They might not actually be at the heart of what matters. The policies may be much more important to driving behavior. If you want examples of what those things entail, you can see the detail put on the right of the screen as you're looking at it. And then the final thing is what I call 6 I's, 6 elements here. You can see there's 2 columns of influences. There's motivation and motivators, and there's competencies and abilities. And those are separated out into rows, which are personal or individual, social in the middle row, and then system, structural. Our experience of working in inactive groups and communities is the most important of these columns, unquestionably, is the competencies column. Don't worry about the motivation. If you can get a behavior to take place, competencies follow from that, and that drives motivation much more than believing that motivation drives competency and working hard. We found it much more the other way around. So these are, get your 6 eyes on, you'll hear me say it. So if I put some numbers on these circles, you can see what it says in the circles. What I'm going to try now is ask you to think about this in terms of your own driving behavior. Okay, so next slide will show you these same things in the middle, but think about, so you can see them in the middle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you've got stuff around the outside, which is all designed to help you to drive better, to drive safely. So what I'd like you to do is have a little look at some of them and think, okay, I wonder what factor that one's doing. So if I ask you to look at something that's at about 7 o'clock, the E, can you see there's a 10-mile-an-hour speed limit? What are those, which of the circles do you think that best represents? Do you think that's about, is that about individual want? So circle number 1, can you see that being circle 1? I don't think I can see that as being circle 1. What I think I can see it as being is a change for the environment. So circle 6. Can you see that that's reminding me, it's a sign on the side of the road that the speed limit here is 10 miles an hour. That's changing my environment. I might prefer to drive at 30 miles an hour, but it's reminding me. If you look around these things, see if you can marry up some of them when you have a chance to have a look at it over it again. But one thing I'd point out to you, I'd like you to think about the item J, which is at about 3 o'clock. Can you see it says drink drivers caught during summer campaign? Okay, remember back to the alarm bell coming out of the loo, the hand washing? This is a shame activating thing. It creates a social norm, that's for sure. But the challenge in it, which we've seen reflected in COVID, is when you see lots of photographs about people not honoring distancing. This is making not honoring the drink drive rule the norm. Equally, when we show people not honoring the distancing as a norm, it's justifying breaking the norms. This is a bit of a challenge. This is not a good nudge. Okay. So what I've tried to show you there is that we've got lots of circles working really hard, and they're interacting. This six eyes kind of approach is a really useful way of thinking about that. And I've tried to just encourage you to think about using nudge, etc., to move from confetti approaches, which are individual magic bullet approaches, to much more spaghetti approaches. And if you want to learn more about these things, all of these things are free. The biggest image on this slide here is a talk that's coming up with Cass Sunstein, who's one of the principal architects of nudge theory, and he's a really nice speaker. All the other things are free. Just alert you to the behavioral economics manual in the bottom right corner is free. It is fantastic, a fantastic resource for those of you who want to learn more about the academic sort of side of things. And then the bit just above that is what I put into Google for Google search, using nudge theory in coaching. And that's just the videos that are available. There's tons of stuff that's there. Feel free to go for it. All these sort of stuff, they're fantastic resources. So it's time for me to stop and time for us to start talking. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Jim. That was fantastic. I wonder if you can stop sharing your screen. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I told you yesterday when we did the dry run, my mind's on fire. Okay, we've had this conversation plenty of times before, really, but I've taken countless notes, really. And I've got a million questions. I'm going to ask you a few questions, okay, yeah. To give time to the folks in the audience to type up their own questions after you finished. Yeah. But one first question, really, when you talked about the issues with attention, recall, social drives, and blind spots, one thing that came to mind was, I mean, do those change as a function of developmental, the developmental journey of the person? So that those will be different for a child, a teenager, or an adult. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, because obviously in the room we'll have people that are working with 7-year-olds, people that are working with 14-year-olds, like my case, or people that are working with older athletes. Just let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, what we know is that the developmental trajectory is really all about your brain developing, and so you move from bottom to top in terms of brain development. So if you imagine from your chin up to the top of your head, you develop that way. And by development, what I mean is you put extra myelin on your nervous structure, and that means that the nervous pathways work better. So what you're learning in that process is, well, think of a 4-year-old versus a 10-year-old. A 4-year-old's much more emotional because the brain structures that are developing there are all about emotion. So everything is emotional to a 4-year-old. When you get to 10 and 11, they're now getting the top part of their brain developing, and then it's starting to move forward. And as you move forward, you're starting to get into being able to anticipate cause and effect. So now you can ask kids to plan more. So you see where I'm going with that. So, but at the same time, at that kind of age, that you're kind of middle teens, it's much more important that you affiliate to your peers, your social interests are much more powerful than your family interests. And any of you who've coached 15-year-olds will know that, you know, some of them are much more interested in the opposite sex, and others of them are still really 10 and they're interested in what their mum says. You know, you get that whole kind of range inside your group. But, you know, for us as adults, that continues to move forward. So where you are in your brain development, your brain development comes forward, which allows you to work your anticipation and planning and thinking ahead, but then it moves left to right, and in that stage what's happening is that you're no longer interested in zooming in as you get older. You're interested in zooming out and getting the gist of things, which is why those centers, if you want advice from somebody, you don't normally go to somebody younger than you unless it's about how to fix your computer. Yeah, if you want someone about a problem you've got in a kind of working, functional way in everyday life, you go to someone older than you who can give you the gist of what's needed, and then you can focus on your capacity to zoom in, because that's what you're good when you're younger. And those are the developmental kind of trajectories that we all go through.
And that's really interesting, because again, as you were going through the presentation, I was thinking, okay, so what are the sort of behaviors that I'd like my 14-year-olds to do more often, right? And then when you talk about recall, I mean, that's a big one for me when I'm coaching 13-year-olds, because their recall tends to be poor. I mean, it's, like you say, it's poor for everybody. We're all poor at it, okay? But I mean, one thing that we always hear coaches and parents say is, how many times do I have to tell you? Okay. Well, as many as you need to, because it's not their fault. I mean, if they're not remembering it, it's for a reason.
But I mean, the key thing here is, if it's about recall, don't make it about recall. Make it so that the idea is immediately apparent to you. With your idea, shoes on, sheets out. Well, the shoes are the activator. And of course, someone will say shoes on, sheets out. So now you're getting multiple reinforcements.
Yeah. And then at the same time, although it is a function of age, it's also a function of the individual. Okay.
Oh, completely.
Again, there are 13 and 14-year-olds in my team that I don't have to tell them shoes on, shoes out, sheets out, because they do it. Okay. They recall it themselves.
Yes.
And I mean, it was really, when you mentioned those 4 factors, attention, recall, social drives, and blind spots, I thought, well, actually, we need to look at every individual and see which factor may impact on them the most to develop individualized strategies. And
you know, in your case, Sergio, you know, there'll be a kid, you know, 14, 15-year-old boys, one of them will be 6 foot and another one will be 4'2", you know, and clearly what's relevant to, and the key word is personal relevance, that phrase. It's what's personally relevant to the learner. That's what matters, because that's what their attention falls to, which is why you need to nudge them about what they find easy, because they're going to fall to that anyway.
That's so powerful, the idea of what's personally relevant.
Okay? And then if it's socially reinforced, you've got a really powerful brew for making good things happen.
That is something that, particularly, you know, when we coach team sports, okay, and in my sport, basketball, we deal with anything between 12 and 15 kids. In your sport of rugby, you deal with sports millions. Of 30 plus. That personal relevance tends to get lost, because we are so focused on the whole. And that seems to be a really important thing to be aware of, that it has to be personally relevant.
And in coaching, I think that there is something very important in having activities that are for the whole group, activities that are for subgroups, and that are activities that are for me.
Yeah.
And coaching sessions need to be about have that kind of balance, that I can feel myself in it, that I'm not lost. So if I come to a rugby practice, and I see this quite a lot, where it's the night before a match or the practice before a match, and half the boys are standing around doing nothing. It has no personal relevance to them, and that's just not okay.
Yeah, it's a sure way to lose them, really.
Yeah.
I mean, and I find this way that, I mean, in that sense, what we're actually losing is their attention.
Yeah, completely. It's all about attention.
If you lose their attention,
yeah,
they're gone.
Yeah,
they're gone both physically and metaphorically, really.
Yeah.
Brilliant. We're going to start taking some of the questions from the audience. Dina was asking a question that I also wrote down, because it's a little bit counterintuitive in terms of what's out there really in terms of motivation, where you were saying that competence drives motivation, not the other way around. And that we have to spend more time building competence than building motivation. Expand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, what we found is that most new behaviors are pretty fragile, so that they won't last very well. So an example that I would use a lot is if you're expecting kids to come back to sessions, for example, what we would typically work on is that we talk about comeback behaviors. So today's session has to end so that person X, I'll say 14-year-old, wants to come back even before they've left you. And that's a product of how you've ended that session. So an example, we would talk about what we call a tough message. And I don't mean that it is tough in the sense of roughy, toughy, physically tough and mean. I mean, TUF, tell your friends. So what we've got to do is we've got to remind them, if you've liked today's session, tell your friends about how much you've liked it and that you want to come back. Now, the most important friend from the end of the session to coming back next time is the person who drove you there. So the work is on getting mum or dad, presumably, or the nice neighbour who drives you there, to tell them how much you loved it, and it'd be great if you would you come again next week, please? You see where I'm going with this? So we really do make it much more functional, and so we're thinking about that all the time, Sergio. Make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that sort of flies in the face a little bit of some of the messages that we sometimes see around coaching, really, that everything has to be, how can I put this, very woolly and softy, in the sense of, let's build the motivation first. And I think, at times we just have to really go, okay, let's make them better. And then they will come back and they will be motivated. And always, like you were saying before, being really self-aware of what it is that we're doing, and knowing everybody, so you know how far you can push.
But keep in mind that adult brains are different to adolescent brains in terms of what they need. So rewards, what rewards and excites you when you go to a fun fair just is not interesting to a 13 or 14-year-old. It's nowhere near scary enough, because they need way more dopamine than you or I need. But once they get dopamine, a really important function of dopamine is to remind you where you got the reward. So if I know that I get dopamine from Sergio's coaching, but not from someone else's coaching, then I seek out Sergio as a 14-year-old. And no amount of encouraging me to go to the other person is going to get me to go there, because I get something good, which to me feels like growth. It feels like improvement. It feels like success. That's competence. I've got to feel like I'm competent. Now, the example that I use about the journey home, that journey home or back is where competence is imperative for that boy or girl, because the behavior cannot be repeated without the journey back.
Yeah, that's terrific. I mean, I really want people to hang on to the idea of creating dopamine-rich experiences, really, in our coaching environments, because that's really powerful. And the idea of the tough behaviors, the comeback behaviors.
And keep in mind that the idea of fun isn't always about laughter, etc., etc. It's about meeting a challenge. It's about personal improvement and being recognized for that. And when your peers recognize you for it, that's almost as good as a coach, depending on your relationship with that kid. Some kids, it's much more important that their mate says it than you say it.
Completely. I mean, that brings another point, really. I was thinking, you were saying before that we're all different, and the teenage brain is different. And that's something that, through lockdown, we've learned to understand a lot better now, because we've spent 24/7 together. My wife, myself, and the two boys, right? One at 9 and one at 14 years of age. And we're watching TV together, and we're all laughing at different points.
Yeah.
Because things are relevant in different ways to us. So sometimes my 9-year-old is laughing his head off, and we don't get it. We don't know what he finds so funny. And sometimes he doesn't know what we're laughing about. So that's a really important point there.
And that's one of the reasons why kids of similar ages seek one another out, because what's socially reinforced isn't reinforced by you as the father of a 14-year-old. They need other 14-year-olds to socially reinforce themselves. And if they reinforce themselves around what you're doing at your club, they're going to want to come back.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's move on to another topic, because again, that's another question that I was going to ask you. But Mathieu was asking about how do we identify the actual or the real who and the hidden why? So I wonder if you can expand a little bit more on that notion, and how do we go about identifying it?
Yeah, there are kind of some fundamental things about what we're interested in. So an example would be, I've talked a lot about nudge. And you remember the two-factor model that I had, which was fuel and friction? Well, if you say nudge is fuel, then the friction thing is really interested. And so basically anything that makes you roll your eyes or makes the kids roll their eyes, that's a sludge factor. So we've got nudge and sludge. Fuel and friction, okay? So they're kind of counterparts for one another. So anything that makes kids roll their eyes. So, and this is for all of us, anything that makes us wait and we can't see the point of waiting, that's a massive universal factor. Standing around doing nothing is another thing that drives us crazy, and where there's no purpose. So we have to keep thinking, okay, which kids lose purpose here? So when you're doing fitness training, some kids will just switch off, right? The kids who are really interested in the technical skill or the physical development kind of aspects of, handling the ball, learning technique, learning tactics, that kind of thing, Sergio, they've got to have that. So you have to move around, and you will know, why you have physical, psychological, technical, etc., why you have them in all your coaching manuals is because those are audiences. Those are your audiences. That's why your I Coach Kids pledge is about those things, because those are your audiences. The kids have different combinations or different cocktails of those interests, but you've got to cover them all.
That really, we go back to this idea of, if I want to change a behavior, if I want to change one of my own behaviors, okay, the first thing is self-awareness. I mean, the idea of identifying the who is, okay, who am I really, or what is it that I really do, right? And for example, in my case, and I've mentioned this to you in the past, I am very emotional, okay, when I'm coaching, okay, and I always put it down to my Spanish background, which is an easy excuse.
Just poor emotional regulation, Sergio.
Completely, as a country in general, okay, but it's one of the things that I've always said. Well, I've made an effort to identify that as a priority. And I've got better, by no means perfect, but better. And is that one of the biggest barriers to behavior change, when we don't actually accept the need to change or really pin down exactly what it is that we want to change?
Well, it can be a barrier. Another barrier is that we're drawn to people like us.
Right.
So the kids who show up who are like we are, they tend to get the lion's share of your attention, and the kids you really don't like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are kids, and you think, well, what have I got to do here? And for any of us, small is going to make things happen. So start small by just making sure, as an example, just welcoming each child to the practice session, just using everybody's name once every day in the session. That will include every single child. Now you're on the road to making behavior change work for yourself. And it's small behaviors that are reinforced by the physical environment. So if you have a key ring that says, names, Jim. And that's the last thing I look at before I go on court. That's what I have to do. Then it's from there. My job is to use all 24 names of the boys or the girls who are there in front of me now. And that's my work. And I'm going to test myself at the end of the day, how well I did that. How well did I do my best to do that?
And you mentioned as well in terms of the hidden who.
Yeah.
Is that to do with the understanding how many people, you said how many people have the same problem?
Yeah.
Why is that so important?
Because there may be people where it's only an individual who is like that. And so that's not necessary for a public intervention or a kind of structural change. It might just be that that's a private consultation, you know, an arm on a shoulder or whatever the deal is about, I've noticed this. Is there anything we can help with there, rather than making it public? Whereas if it's, you know, if 3/4 of the lads always arrive at 5:15 and practice starts at 5 o'clock, you've got a systematic issue or a system error. So go back to your 6 eyes and go, okay, what are we going to put in the 5 and 6, circles 5 and 6, that's going to make this a system so they show up more. Now, if it's the parents because it's traffic jams, then you might say, right, it's a parental intervention rather than a child intervention, because the kids are not in control of this. Mm-hmm. But you've got to look carefully at the problem.
And that's, that's a great example, really, because we've used social pressure in terms of stopping children from being late, because there's nothing worse for a child that when they arrive at the session and the session has already started.
Yeah, completely.
Okay, so that's why we need to start the sessions on time, even if it's just one kid there, because when the others come, they realize they are late because things have already started. Okay,
and you don't need to tell anyone off. You don't need to bring it up. They feel it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we've got that shame mechanism. The social judgment of others is very ripe for us as humans.
Absolutely. Perfect. So moving on to another question, my good friend Matt Johnson is asking, what kind of nudges are really effective in terms of high performance athletes and Olympians? What do we know about using nudge to influence elite athletes?
Well,
if anything.
Well, frankly, next to nothing, because it's never been used. This has been used predominantly for doing social good. So that hasn't usually been the concern of the elite athlete environment, though there's no reason, of course, why it shouldn't be. If you wanted to think about charitable giving, doing things in the community, etc., I'd have absolutely no problem with applying it to that things. But, a hot new topic in nudge theory at the moment is self-nudging. And I'll just alert you to this. In the NBA, one of the biggest interventions, I think it might have been the Lakers a couple of years ago, one of the biggest interventions was sleep intervention, where the idea was that they had to get the players no more tweeting after 10 o'clock at night because they couldn't control themselves, and it kept them awake far too much of the night when they're supposed to be asleep when they're on the road. So self-nudging is really important, but even elite athletes fall prey to the psychological challenges of attention, social issues, etc., etc. They have the same challenges.
I mean, I remember a few years ago, I went into a couple of meetings at the British Olympic Association, and the chief medical officer there was very strong on two things, really. And this is back in 2012, before the London Olympics, where they really wanted to use nudge theory to impact how well athletes maintain personal hygiene in the lead up to the games, because the smallest of infections could derail your Olympic preparation. And they had statistics of how many athletes had gone down with any kind of infection compared to other countries. They were really, really strong on that. And the other one was around the idea of managing people's diets during the Olympics, because when you go into the Olympic Village, and it's amazing that I've been fortunate to go into the Olympic Village, and there's a huge food court, like the size of 3 football pitches, with all the food you could ever dream of, and from different types of cuisine. There's a massive McDonald's, because McDonald's is a sponsor of the IOC, and they knew as well that there was a lot of problems with athletes gaining weight during the Olympics, because also you train less during the Olympics. So again, they were trying to find ways to nudge people into.
Okay, if we look at DietNudge, okay, there are some really good meta-analyses. And what I'd encourage you to do, for those of you looking back over this, look back over the back of my scorecard. So my scorecard is this. Okay, remember the thing on the back? Look in there and think about what's the easiest thing you can do. And in diet-related nudging, the idea that your plate is smaller is way more powerful than putting a signal on the food about how many calories there are and how much fat there is in and all that kind of stuff. The behavioral nudge, where it makes you do the behavior, is way more powerful. So not about thinking about. So on the back of my scorecard here, on the back of that, don't go to the right, stay to the left. Make it so that the behavior is super easy and doesn't have a high cognitive load, where you've got to think about it.
And that goes back to the idea of the east, making it
completely.
easy.
Yeah, completely.
Because is there any, do we know what's more powerful? Easy, attractive, social, or timely, or does it have to be all four of them? Or
well, our experience is it needs to be all four, because where it will fail is where you haven't addressed it. It's a bit like filling up a sink with 4 holes in it. You've got 4 plugs. Well, if you only put 3 plugs in, where's all the water going? Well, it runs out where the gap is. You've got to get the plugs in.
And that goes back to the idea of spaghetti being better than confetti.
Completely, yeah.
That you have to try and, all these problems are complex problems normally.
Yeah, and people have their dynamic lives. New problems emerge in people's lives that they've never seen before. Your systems have to be able to accommodate that non-linear kind of life that we all lead. Who would have predicted COVID? Who would have thought that we could ever have lockdown almost worldwide? It's inconceivable. And yet here we all are. It's not inconceivable.
Absolutely. Another question. Jimmy is asking us, so how do you change a culture when the social norm, and as you say, we know that social influence is so powerful, when the social norm is poor behaviors, when people are behaving really poorly and you can only copy poor behavior because there are no displays of good behavior?
Okay. Well, one, you've got to create displays of good behavior. You must not reinforce the bad behavior with your attention. It's so important. And then you've got to find key players. Okay, and most people don't understand this. Coaching's got this, I think, kind of a little bit wrong. The key players in a population are about 3%. You've got to know who your influencers are. So I could ask you, Sergio, and in your squad of boys, who the key influencer, 1 or 2 of them is, right? And amongst the parents, who that person is, right? You don't need loads of people. And once you've got your key influencers together, you then remind them of the action and they will start to drive cultural change. Your people managers, if you're in an organization, then have to be part of it as well, because they have the official title of being influencers. You don't need 51%. You need 3% of key people, and then they reinforce the powerful messages in their own behavior and in the shoes on, sheets out kind of way. Everyone's got a phrase that reinforces the messages. We don't pursue the bad behavior. So social distancing has been reinforced the wrong way.
And that's why influencers get paid so much money to do something silly on YouTube, because they really influence people.
But also remember that the influencers are in sports clubs. They are often not the person wearing the big hat. There's someone who's it's if you've got a professional sports club, it's not the CEO who knows what's going on. It's someone way further down the food chain, and that's your key influencer. And you may have 2 or 3 of those kind of people. You must get them on board.
I'm just smiling because Matt mentioned in the chat that he can hear my pen as I'm writing when you talk. Okay, I'm just gonna say, Matt, you should have seen our PhD meetings back in the day. I ended up recording the meetings because I couldn't keep up. Great stuff. Something that a phrase that you said that really stuck with me was the idea of that we are predictably irrational. That's even poetic. Okay, but can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, I'll give an example. Maybe some of you people are wearing jeans today. Okay, I wonder how many of them bought them torn. Well, you see where I'm going. I'll use another one. And I'm stealing these examples from Rory Sutherland, who's from the Ogilvy marketing group. He's a fantastic speaker. But what about this one? Red Bull. I mean, Red Bull is one of the world's most popular canned drinks, right? Have you ever tasted it? Oh my God.
It's like syrup.
That should not work.
It's like medicine.
It's horrible, but that's part of its appeal. And it's in a small container to make you feel like it is medicine. And then it's marketed around its restorative powers for cognitive performance.
Yeah.
And you go, so it can't be in big volume. Otherwise, it's not really medicine, is it?
Yeah.
And so it's a fabulous example of how predictably irrational we are. That we buy something that doesn't taste good.
But it apparently goes well with vodka. Apparently.
Okay, I don't know. I've never
I'm
had
told.
it.
Perfect. So, I mean, is it a case of making people more rational, or is it a case of making people more predictable? Or
no, you won't be able to, because what we're calling irrational is because it doesn't fit with the logic that we want to impose on humans. Right. We all do these things. We all spend too much money on things that have no meaning. You know, why did you buy that big Audi when you cannot go any faster than anybody else on the road? But you still, or whatever, I have nothing against Audi, but why did you buy that expensive car? Because it means something socially. It's not about its performance in terms of going faster or better. That's irrational to spend 3 times the price as someone who buy a much smaller car. And yet it happens across the world.
Absolutely. Let's get into the idea of self-scoring, because I know you do it religiously, and I know you've been really helping myself and others to do it, and I'm a witness to the fact that it really works. Really, it really focuses you and gives you a certain sense of satisfaction. And self-scoring is a very individual thing, right?
Yeah.
So you have to score yourself on the things that matter to you.
Yeah. So these things, these are ones that I'm really happy with for me. But if I want to get much more specific about behaviors during coaching sessions, well, that's fine. I've no problem. You don't have to have my 6. Put something else that's personally relevant. Remember, personally relevant and socially reinforced. So part of the reason why I'm really enthusiastic about this, Sergio, is I found it personally relevant. But when I show it to you, you find it good. That's socially reinforcing to me. And Laurie Patterson's on here as well, and she knows that I go on about it with her as well. She gets messages from me every day about scoring, and she knows what I mean. And the more I get to that feeling that it's working, I know it works for me, but when other people tell me it works, now I'm even more committed to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fantastic, really. I mean, as you were talking there as well, I mean, one of the main issues that we have with young people, and no, that's a stupid thing to say, really, with everybody, is the idea of how distracted we get with mobile phones, for example. And I was just reading again there about Matt mentioning the idea of this concept of self-nudging was really important. Yeah. For example, I know I get distracted with my phone when I'm working because I'm managing the Twitter account for iCoach Kids and doing all these things. So it's always a temptation there to see if I need to put something in there. And I've had to come to a point where I don't know if it is a nudge, but if I need to be completely focused on something, I will put the phone in a different room.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'll be drawn to it.
But this is an interesting example of where in the past we've got the motivational literature wrong. So you'll have heard of the marshmallow test, okay? So the marshmallow put in front of the children. The longer you last, I'll give you more marshmallows, okay? How long can you last? And so this is supposedly an idea of self-control. So you're supposed to self-control around your mobile phone, right? What we've learned is that the people with the highest self-control create environments so they never have to use their self-control.
Right.
So that's really powerful. That's why you use nudge. It prompts you to do the good behavior, so you don't have to use any self-control to do it. It's just automatic.
Yeah. So that's...
So there's a brilliant example of a nudge in Mumbai, a traffic nudge, where apparently people believe locally that if you beep your horn when you've been waiting at a traffic lights, it speeds it up to move to green. So what they put onto the traffic lights now is they've got a timer, and it tells you how long you've been waiting, which is really important. But then it also tells you the decibel level in that environment. So if you beep your horn, the decibel level reaches up. When it reaches a certain level, it resets the clock to 90 seconds.
Right.
So are you going to blow the horn? Are you going to be beeping your horn very long? I don't think you will, because it's immediately right there. The right thing to do here is just wait patiently.
I'd love to see that system.
It's fantastic.
Spain. It'd be amazing.
Oh, well, okay.
I mean, Pekka was asking a question really around the idea of, okay, so we've talked a lot about how to nudge players, okay?
Yeah.
But obviously a lot of the people that are on the call, actually maybe their responsibility might be they're a coach developer or a performance manager or someone that works with coaches, and they might want to, or a head of coaching for a club, and they may want to encourage their coaches to do different things. Where would you start really if you wanted to encourage coaches to do something?
I think where there's a shared mission, you're capturing personal relevance and social reinforcement. So if you can agree what the kind of codes that you're really interested in, the key behaviors are, if you can agree those between you, but when I say agree, I do mean agree. I don't mean that you go in with an agenda and you force them into it, because you're doing Sisyphus's job then. You're going to push that rock uphill forever. They've got to find value in the things that you come up with.
And is there any point, sorry, Jimmy, is there any point, because this is a bit similar to the point around motivation and competence.
Yeah.
At what point do we have to push the rock up the hill a little bit until then it becomes a downhill because they see the value of pushing that rock? Is that?
Yeah. Well, now we're into the difference between starting a behavior and then making it better.
Okay.
So what I'm interested in the short term here is just starting behaviors. So behaviors that are small, easy to do, reminded by your environment, etc., will get going. They will then generate dopamine because you get better at them. They then become automated. You don't have to think which hand to pick up your pen with, do you? That's become automated over years and years. What you're looking for is automation, but of something quite small. So an example, when you're dealing with children, what's the smallest number of teeth you need to brush? Well, the answer's one, isn't it? But when you've started one, what do you do? Well, you do them all. But the goal is one. Don't shift the goal too early, because otherwise you can fail. And now I'm not getting any dopamine from failing. I'm getting quite the opposite. I want to run away from that kind of environment. So I have to be able to handle failure and kind of setback. I don't want to call it failure. That's not helpful language. But the setback. And I need your help as my coach to help me to understand the setback. Now, if my peers help me to understand the setback as well, because some are a little bit wiser than me, excellent. Now I'm getting that reinforcement of it's okay to stretch myself a little bit. Brilliant. But I still need to get success on the stretch. It's too tempting then to leap ahead, having made one bit of progress, to then push into a new level of progress, all of which is setting me up for a fall.
And that's a very common mistake in coaching, isn't it?
Yeah, very much.
That we go too fast, too quick.
Yeah,
or too far, too quick. Brilliant. Okay, I've got another question from Dina around how do you balance setting and sticking with a goal with keeping interest in the sport?
Well, a lot of the goals that we're talking about are self-set. So it's boys and girls setting them so that's preserving their autonomy and respecting their decision-making. We might say, we can be coaxing them and saying, well, could you go a bit more on that? Because you think they've got more to offer. That's about, I've been watching you and I've got some evidence to say that I think you can do better. So it's not, I require you to do better. So the autonomy in that kind of later adolescence is absolutely fundamental. And it's that practicing of anticipation and looking ahead, that brain center, which is just in here around the back of your eyes, which is kind of the last part to develop. And it's the last part to develop in boys, of course. So they don't get that so well. But it's to respect that, but to give them practice at doing it. It's very important that they practice it. Otherwise, they get used to watching you working.
And that's important because I think a lot of the times, really, we take that away from young people because we want them to be successful. So we don't allow them to fail. But the only way to get it right is by allowing them to do it a lot of times, really. And in terms of them using their own initiative.
But coaching culture is part of the challenge here, Sergio. Part of the coaching culture is to work your ass off when you're out there coaching, right? And you've got to show everyone how hard you're working.
That you're active.
That's not what it's for. But that's become part of the culture. And actually, you want to see them working. But if they've got used to coming along and watching you working really hard, Sergio, they'll let you. That's not the culture you're trying to create.
Yeah.
The culture is that they work hard to get better on problems that they set for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You help them going with that to set some initial problems, but then you're trying to get them to see what the problems really are and how to solve them.
Perfect. I'm gonna wrap up in a second, but before we do that, I'm just gonna be a bit cheeky and ask the audience, if they can, to just maybe identify one behavior they may want to change on themselves or on others, and just put it on the chat and see what comes through before we finish. So guys, if you don't mind being brave and just maybe jotting down some of those behaviors, either personal or behaviors of your athletes that you want to change, it'd be nice to see some of those.
But just as you're waiting on some of those things, Sergio, one of the things that we work on a lot, because I do physical activity promotion in the community, and what we're interested in is unheard from groups. So there often be groups in coaching, I'm sure, because it'll be no different, where you never really get to know what they think about anything. So actually spending time watching them more than asking them.
Yeah.
Watch more than ask.
Well, that actually resonates with I think Carl said that the behavior that he wants to change is to talk less as a coach.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a really, I mean, that I'm there with you, Carl. It's one of the things that I actually, sometimes I have to physically just sit myself down to remove myself from the situation, so I don't talk to them and I just let them get on with it, really. Or I might even start a conversation with my assistant coach, not because I want to talk to the assistant coach, but because I don't want to be talking to the players. No disrespect to my assistant coach, okay? But he's really trying to really find ways to let them get on with it, really. Matt is talking about food portions in lockdown. I think we can feel your pain there, Matt. Overly vocal courtside, absolutely. Be less emotional. I couldn't agree more. Communicate points with clarity and precision. Use parents' names as well as children's names. Back to the social influence. Getting the parents on board. How do we get teenagers to accept that working hard is cool? That is not a sign of a weakness, or that turning up is enough. Doing less things as a reflex and just being able to hold it for 1 second before you lash out. Fantastic. So much good stuff there. Jim, I'm going to wrap up there because I know you're a busy guy, but I'm just going to thank you for your time. I'm going to quickly just, if you don't mind, just share my screen again so I can talk to these lovely people about what can they do next. So guys, if you enjoyed these, please, by all means, subscribe to our YouTube channel, maybe sign up for one of our free learning courses or go on our website, share on social media. And if you enjoyed it, also join us next week, same time, same day, with Professor Joe Eisenman and Dr. Sean Cumming, where we're going to be talking about growth and maturation in youth sport, another really unmissable opportunity, really. These guys are the best in the world in this area. So having said that, Jim, again, thank you so much. Always enriching. I don't know how many years I've known you for already, but every time I talk to you, I end up with a million notes and a million ideas. Thank you so much. I think people really took a lot out of it. And have a great